The literature also talked about human rights in prisons. In fact, a manual on human rights training for prison officials documented the rights of prisoners in general, and certainly women, to have safe environments, not to be tortured, to have good health care. At one time, women were shackled when they had their children. Well, that's no longer happening because women have the right to have their children without being in chains. And they also have a right to education programs that is designed to meet their personal, cultural, and social rehabilitation needs. The literature talked about critical literacy curriculums and instruction using reading and writing and critical thinking so that offenders can evaluate their lifestyle and their environment and hopefully make different choices. The critical literacy research has shown that women, multicultural females in general, and female offenders in particular, they can learn to read and write, and they can take advantage of information about oppression and how to deal with that, or sexism, or racism, or any other isms, and how to make better choices. The literature talked about impediments to seeing themselves as victims, and also talked about ways to continue to motivate female offenders to work on their education and work training and parent education, because many of them are mothers, so that they can adjust to the community much better when they are released. The literature talked about this view that female offenders have about being incarcerated. And again, the two young women that I spoke to who are female offenders, they have a view that they are just worthless. And those that are mothers really want to be good mothers. And so we need to have them relearn and rethink of themselves as becoming good mothers, as survivors of violence, because many of them have violence in their life, and winning the fight against substance abuse, as well as understanding that discrimination and oppression exists, but there are ways to deal with that and to manage their life more positively. This relearning was talked about in the critical literacy literature, and that was very inspiring to me. How to infuse a lot of that into the curriculum was something that I hopefully I tried to do in my mapping. So now I'm going to give you guys an overview of my field project, but I did want you to know that I was still sitting here with you, so every now and again I'll show up. But I wanted to give you an overview of the field project, and there were certain people that helped with this. There were a panel of experts, and I didn't want to mention their names. I can say that two of them work for the State Department of Education. Two of them are women. One is very dear to me, in fact. And then the other was the professor of research methods at USF. So I did give them kudos in the acknowledgement section. But nevertheless, I'll let you go ahead and look at my table of contents for my project. And it is a note to instructors, learning outcomes. Let's see. I have an example of some skills, competencies, and I even have an example of the map itself, like a glimpse of a day teaching using e-learning. Blackboard is the class management system that I selected. So in terms of the instructor's notes, this is just that I think that correctional educators need to ask themselves, how much information do they have about critical literacy? Have they thought about how much time it takes to develop a curriculum using some of the ideas of critical literacy? And also, you know, what are their expectations working with female offenders who are incarcerated? So those are some kinds of questions that I have written out for instructors to consider as they're developing a curriculum and instruction model using e-learning. I also have asked them what is their experience with e-learning, especially using Blackboard, since that's one of the most popular forms of distance education or online learning that we use today. I have some learning outcomes that I have suggested for the instructors. And then I also have some skills standards that I use, and those are based on SCANS, which was a group of people that got together in the 90s, and they said for adults or adult learning, there are skills and competencies that are needed. For example, thinking skills, that adults have the ability to imagine and to combine many ideas at once. So we need to provide them with a variety of informational resources. And so I thought that when you bring in the literacy or the critical literacy concept, you want to bring in information about liberation and empowerment that multicultural females can relate to, and not a lot on males and the patriarchy. There's a lot out there for females, for example, who are elected officials in government, since this is a civic social studies unit. So some of those women, like Sheila Lee, Congresswoman, African-American Congresswoman, or even Sotomayor for Supreme Court Justice. Some of their experiences can be shared with women to help them to critically think about where they could be in terms of civic engagement and participation once they are released from the institution. Critical analysis, creative thinking are some other SCANS requirements. Then I move into planning for instruction. I tell them that they need to become familiar with Blackboard, that they need to go through the tutorials, that they need to set up the practice tests, and if they use the McGraw-Hill GED online system, become familiar with that. Start loading their information into the document sharing section, loading their information into bibliography sections of Blackboard, and so on and so forth. This is a thematic unit for civics and government, and so I talk about the inmate learner objectives, that the student would learn about civics and government, the 3 branches of government, that students will engage in their critical literacy skills using some essential questions. And I developed some of those essential questions. For example, I ask, what is local, state government like where you live? Do you think discrimination still exists in governments? What are certain terms such as African American, Latino, ex-convict? Why are they acceptable or why not? To kind of generate a discussion around the topic of civic engagement and government. There are other questions listed here, such as what is the Voting Rights Act? Who benefited from that? Who didn't benefit from that? What are gay and lesbian rights? How do you become empowered to influence laws related to voting? Do you think voting changes society for ethnic minorities in general, and certainly for female ex-offenders. With the Second Chance Act that was signed by our President Obama, a few years ago, ex-offenders have an opportunity to vote. So this is huge to get female offenders, multicultural female offenders, connected to the civics and government and voting. I moved through the curriculum map with some ideas about assessments. You know, there are some teaching checkpoints that I recommend that teachers use. I talk about direct measures for offenders to determine mastery of the subject matter. For example, if you give an assignment to female offenders, they like feedback. They like to know how they've done. So a direct measure would be using a rubric that identified what outstanding is, 90 out of 100 points, or what is good, or what is sufficient. So using rubrics and direct measures and giving immediate feedback is awesome, because Blackboard or e-learning modalities provide that immediately. And in fact, the students can access the information, you know, when they want to. So anyway, I talk more about using McGraw-Hill GED online system. I think that this GED curriculum map is rich with resources. For example, there's a GED social studies workbook. There's a Bridge from Behind the Bars, a look at prison literacy programs by Tulip and Beard. That is awesome, bringing the critical literacy into the curriculum and instruction. There's a great resource by Voices called Minority Women in Government that is awesomely inspiring to minority women. I actually saw this in action. I was the adult education consultant over the Los Angeles region, and I had jail education for the state of California. So I had to visit a lot of these education programs, and so for the multicultural populations, I was very impressed when I saw instructors using materials that related to the lifestyle of the inmate learner. I provide internet resources such as the Association for the Advancement of Computers in Education, which is a nonprofit association that helps instructors teach online, access journals, and they hold conferences. I introduced them to the Distance Education Clearinghouse, tons of information for distance education and using e-learning modalities. The Distance Educator is a great portal for the Western Governors University, which is devoted to distance learning information, news, articles. There is TED, which is for the government and technology. And there's also information from other websites, and I'm not going to read them here. And then finally I get to table 2, where I give a sample daily or weekly lesson plan, and it uses Blackboard, and I tell them they need to make an announcement, they need to have a syllabus. A professor's bio is always great. There's the topics and reading section, so that students know exactly what they're reading from day to day or week to week. There's a professor and student forum for the female learners to interact with the professor about education-related issues. Then there's the content itself, and this one is units 1 through 5, dealing with voting and the American government structure, the 3 branches. Illustrations are suggested because on the GED examination itself, not only do they test the 3 branches and the definition of terms, but they also ask that the candidates or those that are taking the test interpret illustrations, some of the caricatures that we see in newspapers. So that, you know, should be incorporated into their training. There's assessments, teachers' checks, and again, there's some resources. So that's kind of the map at a glance.